continue to seem to discover. This is the one just to the north of Qom, which is a uranium enrichment site dug into a mountain. They bought a wonderful tunneling machine from a German company that allows them to dig tunnels out of rock 4.5 meters across. It was used to make the channel across the British Channel between France and Britain. And they've been building these facilities all over Iran. This particular one was designed to have 3,000 centrifuges, enough to make about 2 bombs worth of enriched uranium per year. In addition to what we know about their nuclear weapons program, we see their missile development programs. And here in February of this year, they launched a space launch vehicle, an SLV. What's important about that is not the fact that they launched a tiny satellite weighing 60 pounds into orbit. What was important about this particular launch was that they showed that they had mastered the technologies that you need to launch an ICBM. In particular, stacking rockets on top and being able to stage the rockets successfully without the whole thing blowing up. In May, they had a successful test of a solid fuel missile. Now, why is this important? First of all, the range between 2,000 kilometers and 2,500 kilometers brings most of Europe into Iran's range. You might want to scratch your head and say, well, wait a second. Iran is a power in the Near East, Southwest Asia. Why do they need to have missiles capable of reaching Europe? What is the strategic purpose for the Islamic Republic of Iran to want to hit Warsaw? Okay? It's a good question. It's a good question. Solid fuel missiles also provide a capability very important if you are interested in actually using them rather than just having them sit around, is that they cannot be detected before launch because the fuel is contained in the missile. With a liquid fuel rocket, you've got to fuel it up. And fueling up the liquid fuel rocket, like the Shahab missile, can take several days. So it's visible from satellites. These sit in silos until the day that somebody presses a button and then they go off. So there's no launch warning. Your warning is the actual launch itself. Now, another interesting thing about this particular missile and the delusions that we have, the self-delusions that we have in the West, there was a report issued by a so-called independent group of U.S. and Russian missile technicians from the East-West Institute in Honolulu, Hawaii, on May 19th of 2009. And on May 19th, 2009, this group, the so-called independent group of missile technicians, concluded that Iran was at least a decade away from being able to launch a solid fuel missile. They had not mastered the technology. It was far too complicated for them. They were a third world raghead country, and not to worry, let's not think that they could possibly develop something so complicated as we Americans and Russians had done over so many years. Well, the very next day, after that report was issued, this rocket went off. Successful test launch. Now, I would just point out to you that a huge mistake that we make in this country is to mirror image and to think that countries like Iran or Iraq will do things the same way that we do, will develop weapon systems the same way. I was asked to testify in 1998 before what was called the Rumsfeld Commission. It was a congressionally mandated panel to examine the ballistic missile threat of the United States. And the one thing that I told Secretary Rumsfeld was that we mustn't consider that Iran and Iraq are going to develop their missiles the same way that we do. They're not going to have beautiful, shining cases with gorgeous welds on them, perfectly smooth. Iraq's missiles were flying garbage cans. They were flying garbage cans. But you know something? They did an awful lot of damage. And they did exactly what Saddam Hussein wanted them to do when he launched them against Israel in 1991. Okay? We shouldn't make the mistake thinking that Iran will go through a 20-year development program to build a missile like that. They made this missile in 18 months. From the first failed test until the first successful test was 18 months. Remarkable achievement. We must never underestimate their technical capabilities. The Iranians are incredibly proficient at this kind of thing, and they have got a very, very well-developed educational system for science and technology. Probably one of the most advanced in the world. These, of course, are the famous quotes, but I would draw your attention to the one in the middle. Ahmadinejad believes not just that his regime will ultimately destroy Israel, but he says we will also destroy America, and this is possible. So he has large ambitions, and the regime has large ambitions. Now, the elections on June 12, which are pretty widely believed to have been stolen by Ahmadinejad and his thugs, provoked huge demonstrations, the biggest demonstrations in Iran that we've seen since the 1979 revolution. People took to the streets. In the beginning, they weren't afraid, but very soon the regime struck back with these paramilitary groups called the Basijis. And the Basijis would ride around as motorcycle gangs, many of them plain clothes, with guns. You can see that if you look at the one up there on the left, the red circle, he's tucking his revolver back into his, or he's tucking his pistol back into his belt there. And they would just shoot into the crowds, like that. They'd go by on the motorcycle and shoot demonstrators in the crowds. The opposition says that as many as 200 people were killed this way. The regime admits to, I think, 37 who were killed during the demonstrations. And of course, they blame the demonstrators for this. Again, more pictures of the Basijis and the people who were used to put down the demonstrations. In that one on the upper left, very interesting tactic that they use. They would send people out amongst the demonstrators and then to knife people in the crowd. The idea, again, to deter them from demonstrating. After the post